Hello, today we're lucky we've got Cathy Wield with us. Thank you, Cathy, for agreeing to come and be interviewed today for the Blandford Literary Festival. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I actually trained as a doctor, although I have written now three books. And the reason I've written books is nothing to do with my training, but actually to do with being a patient. So my very first memoir um, was written shortly after I had recovered from a 7-year long episode that was diagnosed as treatment-resistant depression. And I'd had brain surgery, having been, sectioned, self-harming on numerous drugs, lots of ECT. We all thought it was over, and I was asked to write a book about it, which I did. Unfortunately, it was not over. And the reason was because, in actual fact, the root cause of my problems had never been tackled. And instead, I'd gone through this sort of merry-go-round nightmare of numerous drugs, and my memory was shot to pieces with the ECT. So I had a relapse. Dur well, I suppose shortly after that, I realized that actually the first book, even though it had been well received by the press, hadn't really sort of changed an awful lot. Certainly as far as the way stigma still happened. But I was particularly concerned that actually stigma was present in religious institutions. And at that time, I was a churchgoer. So I wrote another book to sort of try and tackle stigma in church settings.
Yeah.
I have to say, asked for that one to no longer be published because my views have changed considerably since that time period. I set out to write this book really to catch up on what's happened.
Yeah.
So Unshackled Mind is the name of it, a doctor's story of trauma, liberation, and healing. And it is going to be published at the end of February by the Book Guild. And it's available for pre-order now.
That's fantastic. I mean, what a journey you've been on. And obviously, as a qualified doctor, how did you feel being that you're in that profession, being treated by people in that profession? Did that make you question anything at all?
Well, initially, I kind of knew why I'd had a breakdown.
Mm.
But once I was heavily medicated, then no, I really lost track of who
Yeah.
I was and what was happening to me.
Mm.
Because I was a doctor, I was very much aware that I needed to be a compliant patient.
Mm.
I'd heard all about people, who resist and struggle. So, certainly for a long time, I was just swallowing these things, believing everything I was
Yeah.
told.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there was a lot that was unknown,
Yeah.
certainly by a great many doctors, including myself at that time.
Mm.
So that, psychiatric diagnosis is actually just a label given to collections of symptoms. It's
Mm.
not like a physical disease that you can pinpoint on an X-ray or by
Yeah.
a blood test.
Yeah.
Um, so, of course, the treatment similarly is very much sort of pot luck. And actually, we've now found out that there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance.
Mm.
But the
Mm.
drugs do actually cause a chemical
Yeah. Yeah.
imbalance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's been tricky,
Yeah.
and of course, I'm not everybody agrees with me,
Mm.
but there is a good body of psychiatrists now who do.
Mm.
But it's been hard. I won't lie about that.
Yeah.
Particularly because, the medical profession has in the past historically really seen people with mental health problems as weak characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, which
So
clearly
I
you're
really
not.
wanted that changed.
Yeah, I was going to say clearly you're not. That really comes across in your writing, and obviously your first book, Life After Darkness, that obviously covers all that period, doesn't it, of time? And obviously, I'd imagine even just reading that, people who maybe have struggled themselves and with diagnosis would find that quite a reassuring book. However, as you've said, Unshackled Mind, that takes you into what your beliefs is now, which is very much about root cause and a different way of
Yeah.
treating patients. So that's going to be, I think, very well received when it comes out in February. I'm really I'm looking forward to reading that. If I'm honest with you, I think it's something that we're very interested in as a family. My other half. He works for a charity that does coaching and gets to root problems, root the root problem. So
Yes.
that's that's a really good way of thinking. It's lovely to see you smiling and talking and coming through the other side, and obviously being able to share your knowledge and what you've been through your writing. So obviously your writing is obviously memoir, and the
Hmm.
sessions that you're doing for us at the Woodhouse Gardens on Sunday, 17th. So at 1 o'clock, we'll plug it again at the end. But you're discussing about memoir writing, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Brilliant.
I mean, obviously, it's quite tricky writing memoir.
Mm,
So, I'll go into how you tackle naming people or not naming people and places
mm,
when there's any kind of connotation of negativity.
yeah.
Um, and, but I think certainly for me, what I've really discovered through doing this, that actually blaming people is not the
No.
answer. Um, that it, often well, for me in this situation, that the problems are and were systemic.
Mm,
And I was caught up in a system, just like the
yeah.
people who were treating me were caught up in a system.
Yeah.
Um, so that's very important. I'm not here to sort of hammer people over the
No.
head and say you've done things wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the other thing I think it's important for people to know is that I also have to be very careful
Mm,
to protect family
yeah.
members who've also been badly affected by what's happened to me.
Mm,
And they have their own stories to tell. So I'm not even going to attempt to tell theirs.
no. No.
And they don't want them told, so they
Yeah.
need privacy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So this is
so
brilliant that
that
you'll be
that's
able
another element.
you'll be able to obviously talk about your experiences. I'd imagine it's very much going to be with Unshackled Mind in mind as such at the talk. So if anybody would like to come to that, obviously the tickets are available on Eventbrite via the Blandford Literary Festival. But tell us about the free writing technique. You're a big fan of
Oh,
the free writing technique. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
oh yes, of course. Yes. So when I lived in the US from 2016 to 2019. And actually I signed up for a free writing course, initially thinking it meant free, as in you don't have to pay, because you pay for everything in the USA. Um, and realized that actually, no, I did have to pay, but actually it was well worth it.
Mhm.
And it was run by a Mexican lawyer who, like me, was an immigrant. And we actually got on like a house on fire. But the important thing for me was that it unlocked my fiction writing. So
Ah,
when I was a child, I was known to have a very vivid imagination. English was the only subject I really excelled at.
oh, right, okay.
But because I'd got distracted on this course to becoming a doctor, I'd ignored all that part of
Mm,
me.
mm,
So, having done free writing, I realized there was this other creative part. And although you're right, it's a memoir type books which are being published, I haven't actually tried to get any fiction published. I haven't had time. But now that I'm getting more free time, I really want to do more with fiction writing. I love it.
Well,
It
that's
it
funny enough.
connects with something very deep inside.
This is fantastic. This is one of the questions I wanted to ask you with obviously the three books that you already have published. Um, Writing fiction, what sort of fiction would you write? I think, am I right in saying you're a keen gardener? So would you bring the outdoors into your fiction writing?
Um, I, it, that's interesting. So, I mean, what I have already done is I've written a few children's stories.
Oh, fun.
I've also written some skits for plays, and actually they were performed in the US. So they
Brilliant.
weren't published, but they were performed.
Yeah.
Um, but I've got several novels, on the back burner, as so
Yeah.
many people do. Um, and I like the idea that I can bring in the breadth of
Mm,
experiences that we inevitably get through our lives.
yeah.
Um, and so it's definitely going to come in there somehow.
Yeah.
And in a way that I haven't really been able to put in the memoir situation, because
Yeah.
actually my life has been one huge, long list of interminable events and catastrophes.
Yeah.
So, in fiction, I think it will give me the chance to explore prose writing,
Yeah.
become descriptive,
Yeah.
and hopefully sort of touch a few other different ways of using words on a
Yeah.
page.
Fantastic. Do you have a character in mind that you think you would like to use?
Well, I do. I've got several. Um, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. I mean, the other night I woke up in the middle of the night, and this is basically typical for me, and I just wrote a poem.
Ah,
Um, and
okay.
it was on my mind, and I just wrote it down.
Yeah.
So that's how my mind seems to work.
Yeah.
So with my novel ideas, I've actually got to really, be disciplined and pinpoint myself.
Yeah.
As to say, I'm still proofreading for the publisher this week, and then after that, once it's gone and I can't do anything more with it, I
Yeah.
feel it's going to give me a huge amount of freedom to sort of really explore which novel.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give too much away at this
No, no,
stage.
that's fine. That's fine. We'll save that for next year's Blandford Literary Festival, and we can have another chat about that one. Obviously, writing for well-being, again, another passion of yours. So if obviously you've said about you'd like to go into writing fiction, but is there anything else for your well-being that you enjoy doing? Whether that be writing, you've touched on the fact you've written some poetry. What do you do for your well-being now?
It does vary. I actually dance.
Oh,
I
right.
go to dance classes.
Yeah.
Mm. And I cycle, although
Mhm.
cycling tends to be more to get to places, but
Yeah.
I do like it. I love nature. I mean,
Mm.
you're right about gardening. I
Yeah.
love being out and about. And, you know, there was a day a few months ago where I was feeling really, really stressed. And I thought, do you know, I just need to get outside
Mm.
and I just need to walk and actually mindfully look at what is beside the road, whether it's in somebody's garden,
Mm.
whether it's a wild flower or plant. And obviously, this time of year, things are shutting down.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I prefer spring and hot weather, but
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I just think there's something amazing about nature, that just can sort of almost embrace
Mm.
every emotion that you've got,
Yeah.
because you're lost in it,
Mm.
and I feel as though it's almost sort of nurturing me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think
yeah.
you're absolutely right. And obviously, when you're in nature, the only way I can describe it for myself is there's no baggage with you. when you're in nature. You've not brought your house with you and any housework or chores or errands. It's just you in nature. So obviously inspiring, and I know it inspires so many people. And obviously good writing can come from that. So, this is fantastic to hear. Um, Now, obviously, you've said about your proofreading for the publisher, and I know just before we came on to record, you mentioned about your cover and for your new Unshackled Mind. It's obviously you've highlighted a difficulty there. So talk us about the cover of what, how does the process of getting a cover, how should it work?
So I've been lucky enough to have been offered a publishing contract.
Mhm,
So it means that the cover is actually in the publisher's hands.
mhm,
Whereas they have asked me for ideas.
mhm.
At the moment, it hasn't yet happened. So the words are there, and I'm just going for from the final proofreading, and actually the book's available for pre-order on Amazon. But the cover hasn't been done yet, and I'm dependent on them
Mm,
doing that. So obviously that's slightly difficult because I have no control over it.
mm.
I know with my first book, Life After Darkness, they produced two covers actually, and I was given the choice, and I was so grateful for that because honestly, one of the covers I would not have wanted to go anywhere near my book. Um, and so, but this time I'm just having to be patient,
Yeah,
see what's going to come up. I know they're going to do a very good job,
yeah,
but for whatever reason, it's just not ready yet.
yeah, yeah,
And I think the only difficulty is that if you're trying to advertise a pre-order for your book and there's no cover, it
yeah.
doesn't attract people to
I
do that.
I was going to say to
Um,
you that must make marketing very, very difficult for you without the cover there. So, and obviously, I presume, obviously, as a publishing house, they'll understand that. But for you, as the author, it would be nice for you to be able to say, "Here it is. Look at the cover. This will
yeah.
attract you. This is what it's all about." So that must be very frustrating. So, in your publishing experience, is there anything that you've learned along the way from your first novel, your first memoir, sorry, to the third one? Is there anything you've learned?
I think there's a huge number of things I've learned along the way. Um, it's I've I've had to learn incredible patience
Mhm.
with the process.
Right.
Um, this time round, it seems to have got harder, I have to say, as the years have gone by, because the first time round I was asked to write a book. The
Yeah.
publisher came to me, handed me a contract, and I wrote it. So that was kind of scary because I'd never actually had anything published before.
Yeah.
And, I have no idea what on earth made them think that I'd be okay, but they did. And then the second time around, it was a bit more tricky getting a publisher.
Mm.
And this time around, it was even worse. I had no idea who to go to for an agent because I'd never had an agent.
Mm.
And so I was putting out, my pitch left, right, and centre once I'd written the book. And that there's a difference between fiction and non-fiction. So in non-fiction, you actually have to do a proposal,
Right.
which is actually quite detailed
Mm.
and takes a lot of time. And so many publishers and agents have different formats, so it's
Yeah.
very time consuming.
Yeah.
And I really didn't have that time, so I was really considering whether to self-publish,
Yeah.
and just thought I'll try one more
Yeah.
time. Actually, no, I did have another publisher prior to this, but the contract really wasn't satisfactory to me, so I turned them down.
And that's obviously you've hit something that I don't think I've spoken to with any of the other authors that we've been interviewing. Is having a contract. I think that's obviously most authors' dream, but you're quite right. It's definitely worth taking the time to look into the finer details of a contract, and to be absolutely happy about it. So it's nice to hear that you had the conviction to say, I'm not happy with that. That's not what I want. Um, so would that be advice, for a first time published author? What sort of, is there any other sort of good advice that you can give them?
Well, I would say so. What I did with my contract was I sent it to the Society of Authors to look over.
Right.
And they, and I explained that I wasn't happy, and they looked at it and they said, no, we agree with you.
Mm,
I think it's really vital. Don't, be alarmed if you don't agree with what's written. And Society of Authors did actually recommend that I got an agent because they thought an agent would be able to negotiate, on my behalf.
yeah.
But I never got that far.
Mm,
But for me, the thing that made me turn it down was that this publisher wanted control of all media. So
mm,
it meant all blogs, all interviews,
mm,
everything I was to do it with any reference to this book would be under their remit. And I thought, no, that's
no,
not okay.
no,
Um,
no.
so that was that. I think, when you write a book, we take hours and hours and hours doing it.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
it
Yeah, yeah.
hours. And if you think when the book is produced, how much, if you were to divide it by the number of hours, it might be 3p an hour. Um,
Yeah.
but that's not what we're worth. We're
No.
worth far more
Yeah.
as people, as
Yeah.
ourselves. It's not in how much this book is going to cost or the royalties you're going
Mm,
to get.
mm,
So actually, but being able to stand up and say, no, I'm worth more than that.
yeah.
I need to be treated properly
Yeah.
in the way that I want, because this is really precious and I've
Yeah.
spent a huge amount of time on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely pride in your work as well. So fantastic for you, for well done for standing up for yourself. I'm sure that there's many authors out there who just will grab the contract because it's a contract. So it's really nice to hear your experience of that. Um, on a more positive note, is there any book that you've read that has really changed your thinking, either positively or negatively? Is there anything out there that you've read in research or for pleasure?
So there's a journalist who actually looked into the history of mental illness. He's American, but he was amazing. So he wrote a book called Mad in America, and also An Anatomy of an Epidemic. His name is Robert Whitaker,
Right.
and it blew my mind. It was the first time that somebody I knew, well, that I had read, actually looked at all the research that's out there
Mm,
in an independent way. And he didn't write it knowing what the result would be.
yeah.
He didn't research it knowing what the result would be. So, yeah, I thoroughly recommend it. It's very readable.
Hmm.
It's written for a layperson.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it absolutely changed my
Oh
mind.
no, that's good. That's nice to hear. And obviously, I'll make a note of this and pop it in. I think over at the end of the festival, I'm going to put a authors recommend and list everybody's recommendations. So I shall certainly make sure I put that one on there as well. That's fantastic. Right. Well, I think thank you very much for your time today. That's brilliant. I am just going to mention Sunday, the 17th of November at 1 p.m. in the Woodhouse Gardens. If you want to come along and meet and listen to Cathy's fabulous story, and the whole process of memoir writing, please do come along. Check Eventbrite, check the Blandford Literary Festival website, and come and meet Cathy because you're an inspiration, an absolute inspiration. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you. I wish we had more time. Thank you again, and I shall see you. Oh, well, I'll see you on Sunday, less than a week.
I look forward to that.
All right. Thank you, Cathy. Bye bye.